So sometimes I think that we worship leaders are trying to solve a problem that by and large has already been solved. And when you realize this, it actually takes some of the pressure off. Hey, it's Dave Dolphin at practicalworshipblog.com, sharing ideas, tips, and practical advice for the everyday worship leader. And I feel like there's a lot of pressure to create what I call cool church. And I want to talk about what I mean when I say cool church, talk a little bit about where that came from, and then share some of my thoughts in terms of where I feel like the church is going in terms of methodologies that I think actually takes some of the pressure off. To give you a little bit of context, I'm in my early 40s, and that means if you do the math that I went to college in the early to mid 90s, and an interesting thing happened right around this time. There was a couple of pastors that looked around and saw that the church was disconnected from the culture and that the methodologies of church hadn't been updated in decades, in some cases almost a century. And what they were doing, the methodologies that they were doing, were poorly executed. They were doing it bad, well-meaning, heart in the right place, but executed poorly. And so these pastors sought out to do a new methodology of church that I would call cool church, and that's not a derogatory term. When I say cool church, I mean updating the worship style to a contemporary sound with songs that had repetitive choruses and verses and bridges. Guitars and drums would replace pianos and organs. There was this emphasis on doing things well and doing it with skilled people. Messages that would hit at the struggles, the things that we were dealing with right then and there, like parenting and marriage and finances. We had this relaxed feel, this come as you are feel. We're installing coffee bars in our commons, and our atriums were large so that we could connect and talk with our friends. Some examples of this would be North Point in Atlanta with Andy Stanley, or Fellowship Church in Dallas with Ed Young, Willow Creek in the Chicago area, or Life.church, which is based right here in Oklahoma. And specifically, when you talk about worship style, there was already a movement to go a little bit more contemporary with artists like Don Moen and Dennis Jernigan and those Integrity CDs, but even that gave way to artists like Delirious and Passion and a little guy named Chris Tomlin. Cool Church was a renewed commitment to excellence and relevancy, and it was probably long overdue. So the pressure point became competing with the entertainment industry, that if we're going to compete for people's time, we need to, as the church, do something that is at the level of something that they would pay for. That meant lots of energy, entertaining, creative, a focus on polish and professionalism, using good equipment and doing it with skill. That meant being skilled in graphic design and lights and band arrangements. That meant spending money on PAs and moving lights and crazy sermon illustrations. And by and large, this method worked. And the reason I know it worked is that every new church that you see today, to some degree, subscribes to this model. Now, during this same time, during the 90s, the Windows operating system dominated the marketplace. The only people that were using Macs and Apples were graphic designers and crazy people. But then the game changed. And then there was a smartphone, and then there was the tablet. Now, who cares who owns whatever market share of the PC space, because we're too busy on our smartphones and on our iPads. And it's not Microsoft or Apple that's winning in these spaces, it's actually Google. Who would have thought that a search engine company would just run away with the mobile space in this post-PC era? My point in bringing all that up while talking about church is that what worked 10 to 20 years ago doesn't necessarily work today. What worked 6 months ago doesn't necessarily work today. We need to be aware of where we came from, where we are, and where we are going. We don't want to be passively moving. That's called drifting. That's what happens when you're on vacation with your family and you're swimming in the ocean and you look back and you realize you're 100 yards from the shore because you weren't paying attention. We have to realize that the cool church model is actually 15 to 20 years old. In fact, what we call contemporary is actually the new traditional. The people coming out of college right now, getting married and starting families, don't remember anything beyond cool church. Everything they've ever known has been church done with excellence and polish and professionalism. They have no reference point to some of these older church models. Sometimes I think that we older folks are still trying to solve a problem, but by and large it's already been fixed. We're still primarily focused on polish and professionalism, but the thing is that we succeeded at the mission. We won. Good job. Churches, generally speaking, are much better at executing events. We generally have really good preaching. We'll have a good band. We have nice facilities, and none of those things are bad. But as you work to solve a problem, once you do, one of two things can happen. One is it brings to light the next glaring problem that needs to be addressed. Or two, in solving that one problem, you actually create another problem. And when your primary focus is professionalism and polish, you run the risk of coming across as contrived or phony. I was reading something that Carey Nieuwhof said, and if you don't know who Carey Nieuwhof is, he has a blog and a podcast that is fantastic. And being a pastor in Canada, Canada is more of a post-Christian culture. And so for those of us here in the States, when you read his stuff, it's kind of like looking into the future. He's having to deal with things much earlier than we are here maybe in the States, and his stuff is fantastic. And anyway, he wrote this post where he said it's not that the cool church methodology doesn't work anymore. He says if you were to gather, you should gather well, but he would argue that the cool church methodology no longer is enough, and maybe it never was. I think our focus needs to change just a little bit. Just like my generation longed for drums and the ability to bring coffee into the auditorium, bucking that church culture. This next generation that's up and coming, I think some days wishes we just turn off the smoke machines and share our heart a little bit. Where we're going in terms of methodologies, I think actually takes some of the pressure off to have it all together. That it's okay to show your battle scars. In fact, it's actually encouraged. This new generation wants authenticity. They want relationships. They want to know that this Jesus that we believe in is real and not a gimmick. Here's an example. I can hire people that can sing or play better than my current worship team, but I don't think they can be as effective as my current worship team, because when our people are on stage, when our church sees their people, there's that connection. That's my people. That's my family. We're in this together. A hired gun can come in here, play with skill and professionalism, play their heart out, but without that connection, it's not going to be as effective because the relationship side trumps the skill. Now, this whole blog, this YouTube channel, Practical Worship, is built around this idea of equipping and training worship pastors to pursue excellence and improve in their crafts. And I'm not saying that any of that should be different or go away. I'm not saying that the pendulum swings the other direction and now we're not going to worry about being prepared or increasing our skills or honing in on our crafts, spending money on gear, any of that. I'm saying that we need to understand that although we might aim for perfection, that perfection isn't the goal. In fact, we are to aim for perfection knowing that we're probably never going to hit it. And that's okay. It's not about the destination. It's about the journey and allowing our church to be a part of that journey.